duty, honor, country dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be.
The destiny of man is not measured by material computations. When great forces are on the move in the world, we learn we're spirits, not animals.
Now, we are the masters of our fate.
Howdy, gents. Welcome back to another episode of the Wolf and Iron Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Yarbrough, founder and curator of wolfandiron.com, and I'm glad you're here. Well, fellas, I'll tell you what, this interview that I just had with Ken Coleman that you're about to listen to is one for the books. I'm such a fan of Ken's ability to ask questions. He's the host of the Entreleadership Podcast. Most of you guys know him from that show. He also has his own show called the Ken Coleman Show, where he helps people figure out what it is they're meant to do with their lives. But Ken just has a fantastic ability to ask questions. And if you've listened to any of the Entreleadership Podcast episodes, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm not going to lie when I say this was a bit intimidating for me just talking to Ken, because I so respect him in the craft of interviewing and asking questions. And a funny thing actually happened before we got started with the official podcast. I was telling him about some of my own entrepreneurial pursuits, Wolf and Iron being one, but especially with Rustic in Maine and its success. And he just started asking me question after question. Then he was giving me ideas. I mean, I'm telling you guys, it was really a moment that I'm not going to forget. So you're absolutely in for a treat with this episode. But before we get into that, I want to tell you guys about our Facebook group that's growing. I think we got about 1,400 guys there now. This is an exclusive group for men who are really heeding the high call in their lives. This isn't just a bunch of guys getting together, chatting about guy stuff. We have fun over there, but really it's a place of growth. It's a place to be challenged. It's a place to bring your ideas and your questions. And you get to be with like-minded men who, well, if you like Wolf and Iron, if you like what we stand for, you're going to find your people over there. You can get there by heading to wolfandiron.com/the group. That'll take you over to our Facebook page. You can answer a couple of questions to be led into the group. I look forward to interacting with you guys over there. Now, for this particular episode with Ken Coleman, you can get to the show notes and any resources we mention by going to wolfandiron.com/Ken Coleman. Okay, on with the show. Mr. Ken Coleman, thank you so much for being on the Wolf and Iron podcast.
Mike, I'm thrilled to be with you, man.
Well, I got to tell you, I've interviewed some guys that I really respect, but I've never interviewed someone that I respect so well in the particular space that you're in, especially in the art of interviewing and asking questions. I'm a bit intimidated, actually. And before this call, I was telling you a little bit about some of my entrepreneurial pursuits, and you just jumped right in with questions. It was awesome. But I really very much respect, and I want to say thank you, not only to you, but also the Entreleadership team, because episode after episode, you guys just bring it. I mean, it's just solid guest and information, and you do such a great job of asking questions. So thank you, sir, for what you do.
Well, I'm honored by that and humbled. I appreciate that.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the Entreleadership piece and how you kind of got involved in that. Just for the guys that maybe don't know your backstory, give us a little bit of your backstory, maybe where you grew up, kind of life now, and then also how you got involved with Dave Ramsey and then became the host of the Entreleadership Podcast.
Yeah, that's a giant question, and we do not have 2 hours for me to adequately answer that. I'll tell you what, I'll give you the snapshot, and you fill in, Mike, where you want to know more. I'm a pastor's kid, so I grew up in a lower middle class home with great parents, tremendous love and support, tremendous discipline. My dad is a lover of history, and early on in my life, he showed me the importance of history and pushed me and challenged me to potentially make some history. And so I was just one of these dudes early on that, because of my environment, and I was naturally, nobody ever tended to tell me to be ambitious. I just, huge desire. I just have always been that kid, and I wish I could take credit for it. I didn't do anything. You're just designed that way. Some people design that way more than others. There's no way around that. And I hit the lottery when it came to desire. And so always just really, really driven. and very, very curious. Like, everybody comes into the world curious. Everybody's hardwired to ask, hundreds of questions when they're toddlers. But it never went away from me. My antenna it was kind of like got in stuck position. And so you combine those two innate pieces of wiring, if you will, you're off to a pretty darn good start, and life is this kind of exciting adventure, and what's next, what's coming today, and so that would be, the background that I was shaped in, and then moving into the business world, I was growing my business resume because I thought I was going to run for office. I thought that was the call of my life. I had the opportunity to work with some great men who taught me so much, and was working with John Maxwell for a while, leadership guru, who shaped me tremendously. I got to spend a lot of time with John, and then went out on my own as part of the journey to be able to be in a position to chase broadcasting, because there was a shift that happened and a lot of time and effort spent on life mapping and really searching for what it was that God had for me. And as I was out doing my own thing, I had the opportunity to run into Dave Ramsey at a leadership event that was a national leadership conference that I had the privilege and blessing to be a part of and be on that stage, and got to know Dave through interviewing him in front of 12,000 people, and some mutual respect, I think, developed. Did not know he was watching me as closely as he was. And 3.5 years ago, he asked me to come join this team, and I had to let go of the Ken Coleman show as it existed on a local talk radio station every afternoon on drive time. But it was a no-brainer. Dave said, come join the team. Would you come in it was a great role, but it was a servant role. And I was not a Ramsey personality at that time. It was, hey, come take over the Entreleadership Podcast, which I would have joined the team just for that, because this was a very successful podcast already, tremendous influence and scope. And he was like, you can shape it, you can take it. And so I thought, well, that's great. And he said, I want you to also be the face of my video channel, which was probably in year number 2, so on the ground floor of the Dave Ramsey Show video channel. And then would you, host our live events? And I had emceed before, but that was one of those deals where it was like, okay, that's not new for me. That's not, anything that's going to challenge me, but it's an opportunity for me to serve and to pay my dues. I think it's so important that no matter what level of success we're on, there's some area of our life where we're paying it forward a little bit. Yep. And I think that's really, really important. So that was the role. I said yes. A year and a half into that, Dave surprises me one December afternoon, says, hey, you and Rachel Cruz and Chris Hogan, you're going to host my show in 2 weeks. And it was essentially me doing the hosting as far as the ins and outs and all the setup, because I had done radio, and those two obviously been on the show many times and can answer all the questions. So it was this kind of tag team thing with two of my great friends. And next thing you know, I'm hosting the 3rd largest radio show in America. And it's just been that kind of thing where Dave has just been generous and trusting. And when you're that way as a leader and you give rope to people, it challenges you like nothing else. And so September 11th, we launched the Ken Coleman Show on Sirius XM. So the dream of having a national show where I help people discover what they were born to do and then how to create a plan to make that dream a reality came true. And, man, it's crazy, That's what I do. Most days I'm spent on my show and on the Entreleadership program, and I can't believe I get paid to do that, Mike. That's not ability. It's just it's a good day every day.
Yeah. Man, that's awesome. I see two things at work here, right? One is your ambition, your drive, your desire to make a name for yourself to some degree, but just to make some kind of an impact. And you had that early on. And like you said, that's sort of wired in, and you had some influence from your father there as well. But I also saw something that was cool in your story, and then I wanted to call it out for the guys that are listening to this. And that is Dave Ramsey's decisiveness. Right? His ability to say, I know in my gut what I'm looking for and the kind of person that's going to take over these roles, and I'll know it when I see it. and then his ability to call you out and say, you're the guy for this, right? And I love that part about leadership. And I'm beginning to develop some of that myself, even with some of the friends that I have, where I can say, you'd be really good at this, or you'd be really good at that. But I just think that's a great call out. And for guys that are listening to this, you're in a leadership position, that's exactly what people are looking for. They're looking for someone to be bold enough to kind of call the shots and sort of cast a vision even to their own lives, and to say, here's where I think you'd be a good fit, and to and make those calls. So very good.
Yeah, let me add something to that, because I think you make a good point for leaders there, and Dave models it better than anybody I've ever worked with. What he's doing is he's looking at multiplication. Influential, lasting leadership is not an addition game, it's a multiplication game. And so if you're going to multiply yourself, meaning Dave is looking at a lasting play here, so I'm just one of 6 people that are part of a grand strategy of passing the baton, of succession. And so that's one play. But as you were pointing out, Mike, in a day-to-day leadership role, if you're going to grow your organization, you got to be playing multiplication. You got to be in the multiplication game, and it takes some guts. Here's the deal. Dave bet on me. He didn't know that it was going to work out the way it is, but he believed it. Yep. And he thought it might work out. But at the end of the day, Dave has to go, I'm going to give it a shot. And if it doesn't work, we'll regroup. But that takes tremendous courage. And that's what I want to point out as a dovetail to what you said.
Yep. Anytime a leader makes a decision, people are watching to see how that decision turns out. And as a leader, you feel that, right? You know that people are waiting to see your leadership abilities are really judged based on the decisions that you make. And not everybody is forgiving of failures, as we often are ourselves, knowing that we're going to have to fail a couple of times before we really learn maybe some of the aspects of our new business, or the aspect of managing, or whatever it is that we may not be familiar with. So there's a pressure there, and it does take guts. And so I wanted to call that out, and good addition there. Why Entreleadership and not just a podcast about leadership? Because I'm wondering, what is it about entrepreneurs that need kind of a specific call out or specific focus in how they lead? And is there anything that you can talk to that on?
Well, I would just say it comes from Dave. I mean, he created the term Entreleadership as an internal description as he was training our leaders at Ramsey Solutions many years ago. The company is really just beginning to get its sea legs and grow. And he wanted a term to really describe the type of leader he wanted to multiply here at Ramsey Solutions, and create and multiply there. So the idea is that, he wanted leaders that thought like entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are crusaders by nature. They see a problem, and they feel like they have a solution for it, and they get excited about it, and they toss many times all reason to the wind because of and I love that, and Dave loves that. So he took the idea of what is an entrepreneur and what is a leader, and he just kind of smashed them together as a great visual, and it took off. And so then he writes a book, and it becomes the #1 New York Times bestseller, and then it becomes a business division, and then the podcast is just the extension. We're kind of the tip of the spear for the business unit, and so that's why. There really is a unique combination. You have some entrepreneurs that can't lead a horse to water. Yep. Then you got some leaders who can't think outside of their itty-bitty checklist and space. And so the Entreleader is a visionary. The Entreleader is a courageous leader. And so that's why the term.
Yeah, that's very good. And I've been in leadership roles both as an entrepreneur and as just a more of a managerial team lead kind of thing. And there is a difference. Entrepreneurs, we really do. We're supposed to be leading in terms of the day-to-day stuff. We're casting a long-term vision, but we're also managing the day-to-day stuff. And I think we tend to lose focus on the here and now. We're usually thinking about the next steps. So I think it's absolutely correct to have an Entreleadership focus, because there are things that we just that our natural tendencies to be good in one area in terms of thinking about the long-term strategy of a business, perhaps, or the next thing that I want to make or create, takes away a lot of times from many of the other leadership aspects, like you said, casting a vision and whatnot, that we often fall short of.
Here's the thing. It's not enough to cast a vision. You have to execute against the vision. So if all you're doing is casting vision and there's no execution, then that vision just becomes a fantasy, a dream. That's all it is. It's just a vapor. You've got to execute against the vision.
Yeah, that's great. And, the guys that are listening to Entreleadership Podcast, and there are many of the guys who are listening to this podcast that also follow you, I'm sure, they get both sides of that from Entreleadership, because there's like you said, there are the guys that do really, really well at the day-to-day operations and not so good maybe at the casting of the vision. There are the guys that are just the opposite of that. And one of the things I like about Entreleadership and the guests that you have is that you really do cover the gamut of those things. And everybody who's listening is going to get something. They're going to be built up in some kind of way. One of the things that you've been known for and really just made a name for yourself is in the area of asking questions. I think you do such a great job with this. I wanted to find out, just where do you think this comes from? I mean, you said you're always inquisitive, but I do think there is a specific skill in asking questions and even digging deep like you do with your guest, but without really feeling like you're digging in. You're not just trying to chase a rabbit trail or something like that to just squeeze as much out of them as you can. Where do you think those skills came from? Give us some insight into that.
Yeah, it comes from hard work and studying the craft. When I first started into this, I made sure to watch my favorite 3 interviewers on a consistent basis. I watched them. I listened to them. It was 3 guys by the name of Bob Costas, Larry King, and Charlie Rose, and I just watched what they did, and I watched their body language. I paid attention to how they asked the question with their intonation. I paid attention to the exploration that they would go through in a series of questions. I think many times the best questions in any interview are the follow-up questions, the interview questions that you didn't prepare for. And so I just studied all that, and then I came up with my own system, Mike, and I love sharing this because it's open source, and I just love giving this away. So early on, I started coming up with a system, and then it became like my process. So my process is simply this. Once I know who the guest is, I ask this question. The first thing I ask is, what does my audience want to know? And I know the answer to this, but it's a good review. So let's just think of Entreleadership. What does the Entreleadership audience member want to know? Then I ask the follow-up question, what do they need to know? And there's an important delineation there. You always have to serve your audience. So they're clamoring. So the answer to that question is they want leadership content that's going to help them lead. Okay, that's what they want. What do they need? Well, that's a really big answer, and I know the answer to that. It's a long list, and we have a list that we look at, and that decides the type of guests we get. So now I'm looking back at my guests. If they got a new book out, I'm going, all right, what is my guest's experience and expertise in the specific book? What can they provide that is going to meet those 2 key needs, what my audience wants and what my audience needs? And what that does is it gives you a really clear set of boundaries. I like to think of it as a riverbank. So you got a river and you got banks on both sides. And so I want to keep the conversation and the content flowing within those riverbanks. I don't want to get outside of those riverbanks, because when I do that, I'm teetering on the edge of not providing value in framework of those 2 questions. What does my audience want to know? What do they need to know? Okay, so that's where I start. Then I start to shape the interview. And I always write the last question first. This is super important for young interviewers or inexperienced interviewers. The reason that I write the last question first, or at least think of how do I want the interview to end, because I'll tell you, Mike, I'm at a point in my life with so many hours and so many, I'm probably over 1,000 interviews, I'm guessing at this point.
Wow.
I don't have to write it out anymore, but I do think, well, where do I want the interview to end? Because that's super important. You think of it in terms of you're giving a speech. From the moment you start your talk, everything should be leading up to that crescendo moment where there's a challenge and a chance for the audience to really respond. And so you do that when you give a speech, or at least you ought to be doing it. And I think the same thing applies to an interview. I look at it as I'm leading the audience along in a voyeuristic fashion. They're eavesdropping in. They're pulling up a chair and sitting at the table as I'm having coffee with somebody. And so I want to lead them to a place. Where do I want to lead them? And so that's how I start the process of an interview and laying it out. And so if I know where I want to end up, now that informs where I want to start and what's the journey look like. So it's essentially like putting out an old atlas on a table. And I put my finger down on a spot of the map and I go, that's where we're going for vacation right there. That's where we want to end up. So what's the best way to get there? It's just simple stuff. None of this is innovative, but it is a clarifying way to make sure that you are structuring a great conversation. And so that's the process. And then there's three other questions that I apply to an interview. The first one is what do I want the audience to know? The second one is what do I want them to feel? Third one is what do I want them to do? If you can answer those three questions, you're always going to give a great presentation, whether it be a sales pitch, a speech, or an interview that you're conducting. What do I want the audience to know? What do I want them to feel? And what do I want them to do?
That's just excellent. Solid stuff. So how do you're going through a lot of these interviews, like you said, you've probably interviewed 1,000 people at this point. There's a lot of information that you've amassed in terms of knowing how to lead, how to be an entrepreneur, and so many other different areas as well. How are you applying these things to your own entrepreneurial pursuits, whether it's with the Ken Coleman show, writing a book, whatever it is? Where do you see these things like day to day really making an impact on you?
Well, I see it all the time. I mean, I'm taking notes when I'm interviewing these people. And so, it could be, I'll just give you one example because I'm not trying to be coy, Mike, but I mean, that's literally every interview I do, I'm learning something and I apply it. But I'll give you one specific example. I had Michael Gervais on the Entreleadership Podcast recently. He's a well-known, and I think his influence is growing, and you're going to hear more and more of him. But he's a high-performance sports psychologist, and he's notable in his work for the Seattle Seahawks and Pete Carroll, the head coach there. And so he's helping these world-class athletes get over funks, Yeah. Like I think sometimes we don't realize that these high-performing athletes sometimes get mental blocks in their game. And so he's coming at it, which I'm obsessed with psychology. I love it. I love the science of the brain and how it affects our heart. And so I had him on, and we were doing a great interview. We did a two-parter. It was so good, we scheduled him again and did a two-parter. And I took some of the stuff that we talked about, and I took it home and worked with my 12-year-old who struggles with a little bit more anxiety than the average person. He's not medicated or anything like that, but he has some real visceral fears on some stuff. And in protecting his privacy, I'm telling you, man, it was awesome stuff. Like we worked on some stuff, so that was just one little hack. And I was able to talk with him about it and transfer Michael's practical wisdom and knowledge to my 12-year-old, and it actually helped him. So that's just one example. I mean, I'm like a human sponge. That's part of my job description.
That's awesome. And I like how you use an example of building up your family. And it wasn't just a lot of guys, when I ask that question, they're thinking, okay, how does he do this practically day to day with his, leading a team or something like that. But, you actually brought it back home. And I think that's so key. There's so many things about leadership that we learn about, we may want to apply first to our business. And we see how those things apply so well to raising our children, managing our own home, and those kinds of things. I want to jump into a little bit about the Ken Coleman show, because this really just piqued my interest. You said you help people figure it out what it is that they're meant to do in life. And give me an idea of what that process looks like, because I imagine that's different than asking questions for an interviewer. One, how do you know that you're qualified to sort of make that decision, or are you just kind of directing them to make that decision, to come to that conclusion on their own? Give us an idea of how that process works.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked it that way. I don't make that decision, and it's very much like the interview process that I use with guests. It comes down to a basic analogy, and then it becomes an exercise. And a mentor gave this to me when I was in my middle 20s, and I couldn't get where I wanted to go fast enough, and he was trying to calm me down. And he introduced the analogy of the sweet spot, which, again, nothing new here. Many people know the sweet spot as the spot on a baseball bat or a tennis racket or a golf club, and when you strike the ball in the sweet spot, it feels absolutely effortless. Mm-hmm. And it just becomes this beautiful contact, and the ball goes exactly the velocity that it needs to go. It goes where it's just a beautiful thing. So everybody gets that. And he was saying that the sweet spot in life is where your greatest talents and your greatest passions intersect. So I have rephrased that to say that when you're in your sweet spot, you are using your top talent to perform your great passion. So my talent is what I do best. My passion is what I love to do most. And then when you stick the results, so how does that equation work? When I use my talent to perform my passion, what happens is I'm going to see results that matter most to me. That's values. So when talent, passion, and values all align, you're in your sweet spot. And so this is not something that is debatable. And so when callers call in, I'm not, touching them with some verbal scepter on the shoulder and saying, this is what you're supposed to do. I literally walk these people through those questions. So a caller call in and I'll say, well, if they know their talents and passions, then we try to help them, dive deeper, and then we show them what could be a dream role for them, but they have to do discovery many times. Sometimes they've already got the discovery and they're just going, Ken, I know what my sweet spot is. I don't know how to get there. And so that phone call is more on a plan. So, again, all I am is a scalpel of questions, and I'm an objective listener who is very purposeful to shine a mirror at them and pull things out of them. And all I do is pull the pattern. All I do is tie it together for them. That's the most active thing I do, is I tie patterns and I say, okay, I see this and I see this. What about this? What about this? And many times it's like aha moments happening. Yep. So that's why I love that, and it's very unique. That's not happening anywhere in America on a national radio show, and I'm proud of that. And then here's the other thing, is that you when you have done this process yourself, people trust me. And that's my story, and I've done that. I've done this work. So what makes me qualified? I've done it, and it works. And I'm borrowing from hundreds of years of psychology and things of that nature. So I've got a lot of science behind me. So I'm not out there, saying wild, crazy things. I'm just diving in with callers. And I would challenge you to give it a listen. And most times you're going to hear in about a 10-minute call, you're going to see real clarity happen with people. And, a show like mine does not continue unless people trust me. Yep. And we're seeing real results. And so that's what we're doing. It's really exciting stuff.
Well, it's absolutely needed, because I talk to guys all the time that they're just struggling to figure out what their purpose is in life, what it is that they're supposed to do. And I want to ask this kind of a follow-up question to you, because I find that a lot of times that it's people's worldview, right, where they begin to understand, like, why am I here? What's my purpose? And all that kind of stuff. Very much clouds, or can really give some good clarity to what it is that their value system is, and whether or not they really believe in purpose, or if they believe, we're all just part of this deterministic world, and we're all just, here by random accident, or whatever the case is. I'm a Christian. I think you're a Christian as well. So for me, my worldview is we're all here for a reason. God, created each individual person. He cares about what we do. He cares about how you live your life. He has something for you that's special, that's planned. He's made you unique for something. And so that's my world. That's where I start from. I think a lot of people don't start from there, and they feel like they ought to have a purpose, but their worldview doesn't line up with what their gut's telling them, kind of thing. Do you see any of that kind of any of those issues?
Oh, I mean, that's the number one driver of why my show exists and why people are actually calling in. They intrinsically know, no matter where they're at on the faith spectrum, that there's more to this world than just getting up, working, coming back home, going to sleep, having some fun in between. The one question that everybody asks in their life is, what am I supposed to do with my life? Why am I here? There's no question about that. Now, people of faith, they get that. And yes, I am a follower of Christ. My theology informs my philosophy on the show. And so it's not the other way around. And, look, it comes back to this. The psalmist says in Psalm 139:13, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb."
Yep.
Again,
it doesn't get much more personal. Yeah.
Then that's where it all starts. And I love the imagery of that verse. And I believe the imagery of that verse. I love the word, "you knit me together," because back to what I just shared, I believe that every person on the planet, the most damaged, the most insecure person on the planet, has talents. That same person at some point in their life did have a passion, and it has been buried by hurt and pain. But the reality is, those two pieces of every individual, talent and passion, let me add two more that we all have, and that is personality and values. Those four elements every human being on the planet has. And I look at them as threads. Maybe talent is a yellow thread, and maybe passion is a blue thread, and maybe values is a green thread, and maybe personality is a red thread. And the creator of the universe, who put the stars in the sky, created the vast oceans, also knit us together. And if you cut Ken Coleman open, or we cut you open, Mike, those threads are there. And they've been woven together in a very unique way in each of us. And so, that's the source of the work that I was created to do myself, and that's why I'm so passionate about it. Is I have a heart for the most confident person who just can't quite figure it out, and I have a heart for the person that has been abused and rejected and lied to, and they just don't think they matter. I'll tell you, that's the person that I care most about, the person who feels like there's no hope, there's no reason, and that's what it's all about.
I think it's excellent response. And, for the guys that are listening to this, if you're kind of out there and you're wondering, well, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. I'm not sure if I really believe that there's purpose, but I kind of feel it in my gut. I'm going to tell you, you need to get your worldview aligned. You need to understand, if you really, something's telling you inside that you're here for a purpose, you need to make that make sense in your larger view of how this whole reality that you're part of, fits together. Otherwise, you're going to be kind of in this state of constant sort of a cognitive dissonance where nothing just seems right, because your feelings of purpose is not going to line up with the reality of how you see the world. And so until you get that right, I think you're going to be struggling. Ken, have you heard of this, the analogy of the dolphin in terms of finding the things that you're good at? I don't know if this is a common thing or not.
I don't think I've heard that.
Okay, I didn't make it up, but it goes something like this. You see somebody out swimming, and, they think they're just doing a great job swimming in the pool, making laps and stuff like that, feel really good about themselves. And then they go and they see Michael Phelps swim, and they're like, gosh, I really suck at this. I'm not good at this at all. And then they see a dolphin, and you're like, the dolphin was absolutely made to do this, right? This is what the dolphin was made to do, is swimming at, 80 miles an hour, or however fast dolphins go. And there are areas, I think, in people's lives when you can recognize that you have a talent, because you approach the subject with a certain enthusiasm, but you also just, you feel like you're just cruising. You just feel like you're just going, and you really just have a talent. And sometimes that talent doesn't always include a passion. So like you said, Ken, those things have got to go together. But I think that you recognize it, right? I mean, Michael Phelps, he's not as fast as a dolphin, but in terms of a person, though, he's pretty awesome, right? And there are people, though, there are things that you're going to do in your life that I think people can find that I'm good at this. Whether or not I want to do it for the rest of my life is another thing, but I'm good at this. And I think if you can find, like you said, where those passion and that talent collides, then you're on the right track to along with your values, and you're making a difference in the world, I think you're going to be happy.
Yeah, I would just say to that there's a couple of things that pop out. I think we got to get to a point in life where we admire the dolphin and we admire Michael Phelps, and we don't compare ourselves.
Yeah, that's good.
Comparison is a cancer that will absolutely eat you alive. It'll paralyze you in life, and it's a dangerous game. And so it's okay to observe and say, wow, that dolphin was created to swim, but I was created to do this. And I think that's kind of the point you're making. But I would also say this about Michael Phelps. Very important to point out something. When Michael Phelps first started swimming, he was not fast.
Yep.
Does Michael Phelps have the body and some natural tools? Yeah, look at him. The guy's torso is as tall as I am. So that's a natural talent. And so he has a physical gift, if you will, that would make him have some advantages. But that we'd be looking at a guy like Michael Phelps and never know his story, and maybe his high school coach would go, that kid had some talent. He just didn't do anything with it. But that guy did something with it. Mm-hmm. He stepped into competition. He thrived on competition, and we all thrive on competition. Some more than others. You know what? I should say that. Yeah, that's not true. We all don't thrive on competition. But that's another podcast, it's another conversation. I'm reading about the science of competition right now, so it's fresh on my brain. But the point is that he worked hard, and he had some natural talent, and he loved swimming, and so that's where the sweet spot comes together for Michael Phelps. He had the talent, he had the passion, and it met in the swimming pool. He had the passion of competing, and it just so happened it met in the swimming pool. That was his sport.
Yes, great. Great to point that out. Well, one last question for you here, and we're going to wrap up. You've made a big impact on the lives of people through the Entreleadership Podcast, obviously through the Ken Coleman Show, and you're going to continue doing that. And I imagine that as a man, this matters to you, right? This makes your heart, swell up with the right kind of, the good kind of pride. Give us an idea of what it feels like, right? To be in a place where you know that your talent and your values and your passion are lining up and you are making an impact on the world.
I think it's a 3-word answer. It means a lot. And the key word in that 3-word answer is means. It's meaning. Every one of us longs for meaning. Do we matter? Are we making a difference? The source of all of that is significance. And I'm really, really passionate about significance. I'm not all about success. I think that's an empty word. It's just been ruined. Our world has ruined success because success means stature, meaning fame, fortune, power, and I get it. I'm not trying to be cute with the word, but that's what success means. Significance is the high school teacher, the dude who just always loved teaching. And he never made more than $48,000 a year, but he had a good family, and his kids were good and good citizens. And he taught ninth graders for 25 years. And some of those ninth graders, maybe only 2, maybe only 1, maybe 15 or 20 made their way back to that high school over time and said, hey, thanks. You made a difference in my life. That's significance. And there's not a lot of money there. There could be. If you follow Dave Ramsey's plan, you can be the millionaire next door making $48,000. But by and large, it's not about money and it's not about power. And it certainly isn't about status, teaching the ninth grade. But it's about significance. And a teacher who is in this scenario that I've just brought up is in their sweet spot. And they go to bed every night with the same feeling I have right now, which is it means a lot to get to do what I get to do. And, I get overcome with emotion around here every once in a while. The team would tell you that. Sometimes I just cry, and it's a weight of gratitude that this has nothing to do with that my name's on a show and that people want to take a picture with me or sign a book every once in a while. That all feels great. But that's a fleeting feeling. because I know what it feels like. I know what it feels like when somebody comes up to me and says something really nice and wants to get a picture. It feels really good. It's a nice little, it literally is an endorphin burst.
Yeah.
But as with all endorphin bursts, it goes away. But the feeling of meaning and significance to know that we're helping people. Later today when I wrap the show and we're done with those calls are the greatest thing that I do during the day outside of, interacting with my family. And it's because it's a one-to-one experience. I really don't think about how many people are listening. I think about that one call, and I've got that super finite amount of time to really speak into that person's life. And that's a huge weight.
Yeah.
Not of stress, but pressure. And there's a difference between stress and pressure. I have no problem going to sleep at night because my heart is full, my brain is tired. But the pressure is that I've got to stay in the right spiritual spot. I've got to stay in the right spot of humility. I've got to stay in the right spot of continually learning and growing so that I'm able to give my best to the people who trust me enough. I just can't believe it. I can't believe it. We're not even 6 months in, and I get people calling every day, and they're trusting me with estimate of topics and questions. This is not false humility. I can't believe it.
Yeah.
But boy, oh boy, do I take it serious.
Man. I love that. I love the humility there, and just fantastic response. Look, Ken, I appreciate you. I know the guys that are listening to this do as well. Anybody who's listening to this, you can go to wolfandiron.com/Ken Coleman, and we'll have links to his podcast, Entreleadership Podcast, his book as well. And once again, Ken, I appreciate you so much for being on here. It's been a great conversation, and I look forward to more great stuff from you down the road.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, if I get to Charlotte anytime soon with one of our live events, we've got to connect. I want to come see your stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Come check it out. Don't give away any of my secrets, though.
I won't. Thanks for having me on, Mike. I enjoyed it.
Well, there you have it, men. I'd love to know what you thought about the episode. Feel free to reach out to me on any of my social media networks. And look, if you got something out of this, make sure another guy does too. Share the episode and make sure it gets in front of the guys that need to hear it the most. Until next time, keep your powder dry, and may a fair wind be always in your sails.